Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dr. Petrie's first in the series of 6 lectures on World War II. This year, we've already covered the Holocaust when we did our Chapman University Holocaust Art and Writing Contest. Then we went back to World War I, and now we're beginning World War II. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Treaty of Versailles, the failed League of Nations, the rise of the Nazis, and then the rise of the totalitarian regimes in Germany and Japan. So let's jump right in. You'll notice the first slide has a little cool graphic from World War I's invasion at Normandy, which you're also well familiar with, and we'll spend some more time talking about it. But first, let's go back to June 1919 and talk about the Treaty of Versailles. Here you can see from left to right, we have Prime Minister David Lloyd George, Vittorio Orlando from Italy. This is Georges Clemenceau of France, and this tall, handsome devil is the American Woodrow Wilson, the famous 14 points man. So by the end of World War I, the leaders of the victorious nations, and we know there were 27 of them, they met in Paris. In the book, they're called the Big Three. In this photo, they're called the Big Four. They hoped to establish a lasting peace. Unfortunately, they failed to ensure peace, but the treaty they approved actually becomes a contributing factor in the rise of World War II. The Treaty of Versailles and the terms it sets would prove to be problematic from the very beginning. And we can go to the next slide and we see the 4 things that happened: land, reparations, war guilt, and the League of Nations. You see the handbill announcing the treaty. And we know from the essay we wrote that the terms of the Treaty of Versailles included taking land away from Germany. Germany was forced to give back the province of Alsace-Lorraine to France and the province of Hulcin to Czechoslovakia. The strip of German territory known as the Polish Corridor was given to the newly formed nation of Poland. Germany was stripped of all of its overseas colonies. They were taken away from Germany. There was a demilitarized zone put west of the Rhineland, which is the border between France and Germany. And the reparations to be paid for Germany, a total of $32 billion for the damage and destruction caused by the war. There was also a war guilt clause, which held Germany responsible for causing the war, and the creation of the League of Nations. The next slide talks about how the German army was reduced to 100,000 men, and this army was forbidden to possess tanks, and it was restricted. They restricted the German Navy to 6 large ships, and they banned it from having submarines, and they barred Germany from having an air force. All of those things stuck in the craw, and we've actually talked about how the German Navy actually sunk all their boats rather than turn them over to the English. And then this demilitarized zone, or what they call a DMZ, west of the Rhineland, is where German soldiers and or weapons are not allowed. And the Allies plan to keep an army of occupation on the Rhine for 15 years. So all the Allies will have their soldiers there, but the Germans, or the Weimar Republic, in this case, is not allowed to have troops in the west of the Rhineland. So, and this is, I guess, this map shows you how this is the new country of Poland. This is the Polish corridor right here between the artificial border of Germany and this, the Vistula River. And then this is the DMZ right here, the shaded area. That's between Germany and France, and this is Alsace-Lorraine. They have to give that back. And of course, the Netherlands and Belgium that Germany marched through to get to France for the Schlieffen Plan. But all that is ancient history, and now we are on to World War I. And this next slide talks about the League of Nations. And it's very ironic that even though President Wilson was the guy who came up with the idea and he was the driving force of creating the League of Nations, the United States does not join it. So, according to the preamble of its charter, which is the beginning of its charter, its contract, the League of Nations was created in order to promote international cooperation and to achieve international peace and security. President Wilson had been the driving force behind the creation of the League, and including it in the Treaty of Versailles. The League of Nations was one of his 14 points and a cornerstone in his plan to make the world safe for democracy. Many U.S. senators and congressmen, however, did not like the League of Nations. They had misgivings, they had doubts about the provisions in the League Charter, and they believed that the United States would be obligated to provide military support to other member nations in case they had a war. So in the end, Congress fails to ratify, meaning agree to, the Treaty of Versailles or join the League of Nations. So this cartoon kind of shows how Wilson is all idealistic, like a young child blowing bubbles, and the League of Nations is a good idea in theory, but in practice, maybe not so good for the U.S. So our next slide talks about the rise of the Nazis. And the Nazis are called the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And what happens in Germany between 1919 and the 1930s is that the amount of money, the crushing burden of reparations, totally cripples the German economy. And there's widespread discontent, people are unhappy, there's political instability, and the onset of a global depression that happens in the late 1920s, 1929 was when the US enters the depression, and the early 30s only makes the situation worse. So fascism is a political philosophy that arose in Italy in the 1920s. Fascism, Fascism. Fascism glorifies the nation at the expense of basic civil and human rights. Fascists usually advocate a dictatorial, one-party government. In Germany, that becomes the National Socialist German Workers' Party, known as the Nazis. And they put out a form of fascism that approves of using aggressive action to ensure the survival of the state, and this plan advocated a policy of racial discrimination, as we know, against the Jews. So the next slide shows a very nice picture of Adolf Hitler, a nice painting. You should know that Hitler was born in Austria, not technically a German citizen. He had served as a corporal in the German army during World War I. After the war, he tried to make a living as an artist, and even though his art career did not succeed, it kind of foundered, he discovered a new calling with the National Socialists. Hitler's forceful personality and skills as a public speaker helped him get to the head of the party by the 1920s. In 1923, Hitler is sent to prison for his part in a failed coup where his group was trying to take over the government. While he was in jail, he wrote a book called Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle, and he outlines his political philosophy, and his principles include the facts that the following beliefs. Germany is superior to all nations. Jews pose a major threat to Germany. All German-speaking people need to be united under one rule. And Germany needs Lebensraum, which means living space for all true Germans. So the Nazis promote this view of Germany like it's surrounded by its enemies and it's threatened by all sides. The picture in this slide comes from a 1935 book titled Army, Navy, and Air Force. This was a work of propaganda, meaning sort of false advertising, that the idea that Germany was surrounded by hostile countries and it needed to rearm itself, even though this would violate the Treaty of Versailles. The caption that accompanied this picture read, "With an insufficient military, Germany can be blockaded both by land and sea." And that was the truth. This border right here was the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. Germany could be attacked by Allied troops, and Germany would not have enough troops to take over. So the next slide talks about the Nazis gaining power. This is a picture of Hitler being sworn in as the Chancellor or the President of Germany. In May 1932, Hitler ran for chancellor and was defeated, but he still received about 37% of the vote. In that same election, no single political party won a majority in the Reichstag, which is the German parliament, the German Congress. In late July, elections for the Reichstag end with the Nazis winning 230 seats, making them the most powerful political party in Germany. Hitler uses this opportunity to call for a new presidential election. And behind the scenes, all these conservative politicians and business leaders in the military all push for Hitler to become the chancellor. Not because they really supported the Nazis, but because they wanted to use Hitler's popularity to further their own ends. So in January of 1933, Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. He immediately seeks the removal of any obstacles in his path to becoming a dictator. There's a secret police contingent known as the Gestapo that brutally enforces his will by jailing, beating up, or killing his political opponents. He targets the Jews. In September 1935, a set of regulations, the Nuremberg laws, are imposed. And these laws, are designed to protect the Aryan race, and they deny Jews citizenship. So over in the East, which we'll see, in Japan actually had a constitution based on democratic principles. But by the 1920s, the military runs the government in Japan. And because Japan is a series of islands, they have very limited natural resources, and they had only begun their process of industrialization, building factories, in the late 1800s. So like other industrialized nations, Japan needs to secure resources and new markets. And in the 1930s, Japan enters a phase of empire building, using aggressive military action to achieve domination over key regions in Asia. And the next slide is going to talk about the invasion of China, also called Manchuria, and the rape of Nanking. So in 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, which is a region of China rich in iron and coal. Japan has no iron, no coal, and no oil, so they have to import everything, which is difficult when you want to be an industrial nation. So although Japan joined the League of Nations, it withdrew in 1933 after the League publicly condemned the Manchurian invasion. In 1937, Japanese forces took control of the then Chinese capital of Nanking. Between 1937 and March 1938, the Japanese brutalized and committed atrocities against the city's residents. Many people refer to this as the rape of Nanking. And the death of thousands of civilians, notably women and children and the elderly, is now well documented. It's reported that Japanese soldiers raped as many as 80,000 women, and it is now estimated that close to 370,000 people died. So we're going to close out with this slide right here. You can see in the right-hand corner over here, this is a Japanese soldier about to behead a Chinese villager. This is Chinese parents crying over their dead child. The rape, the United States did not really get involved in the war against Japan until after Japan attacked us at Pearl Harbor. But this is happening in 1937 and 1938. So Japan essentially gets to brutalize and invade China for 4 more years. They dropped 3 more years. They attacked Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941. So next lecture, we'll talk about Italy and its dictatorial regimes. That's enough for today. Thank you for listening. I hope you took good notes, and I will see you tomorrow.